What did the Japanese soldiers write in their diaries after the clash with the American Marines? When young Japanese conscripted into the army found a moment of peace between battles on the Pacific Islands, they wrote down in their diaries not only what happened at the front, but also their thoughts and experiences. These notes show how two things collided: what they were taught before the war and what they actually faced. Japanese diaries show what it's like to be a soldier who has been taught since childhood that dying for the emperor is the greatest honor, and then he suddenly realizes that the enemy is not at all the way he was described. Japanese soldiers were raised to consider the emperor not just a ruler, but something like a sacred symbol of the whole country. In their diaries, soldiers often wrote about their duty to him, and this duty was more important to them than life. For example, General Kuribayashi, who commanded the defense of Iwo Jima, wrote in his last message that his soldiers fought like demons, not thinking about retreating because they were thinking about the emperor. Similar words were found in thousands of other diaries. The soldiers wrote that they were ready to be reborn again even after death in order to continue the war, and no amount of difficulties and fear would force them to retreat. But there were other thoughts among these patriotic notes. The soldiers were beginning to understand they had been taught to hate an enemy they had never seen, and now they saw him in person, and he turned out to be completely different. Propaganda said that the American Marines were weak and pampered people, but in fact, they turned out to be skilled fighters. The Japanese wrote that the Americans were steadfastly holding out under fire, going on the attack even when it seemed impossible, and not panicking as the Japanese commanders had predicted. For example, on Tarawa, a Japanese commander boasted that 1 million enemies would not take the island in 100 years, but in the last hours, the defenders of the island recorded how amazed they were by the courage of the Americans. They attacked wave after wave, losing people but did not retreat. This discrepancy between what the textbooks promised and what actually happened put a lot of pressure on the soldiers. Some wrote that they felt deceived, not about the emperor, but about the picture of the world they had been painted before the war. They were preparing to die heroically, fighting a weak enemy, but they faced an opponent who fought just as hard, just as resolutely, and was ready to die for his goals. It didn't fit in their heads because they were taught that only the Japanese have such fortitude. Here's what they found in the diaries from Iwo Jima. The conditions there were terrible. The soldiers survived on half a glass of water a day and a handful of rice, and for the last 5 days they had been fighting without food or water at all. In these diaries, it is no longer just a description of the battles. The soldiers begin to reflect on the meaning of their suffering. They understood that the situation was hopeless, that the Americans would eventually capture the island, but they considered it important how they would face death. They wanted to fulfill their duty to the end. The Japanese noted the overwhelming power of American artillery, aircraft, and automatic weapons. The soldiers wrote that they were thrown to defend the island with rifles against battleships, tanks, and artillery. One Okinawan soldier wrote a letter to his son. He talked about the time when the family would be able to go to Japan, and in his heart he knew that he would not return there himself. Even when the soldiers were exhausted, when the propaganda could no longer withstand the test of battle, they still tried to find meaning in their death, to connect it with something more. What do you think about this?